sitting in a library. Oldest, I have to confess something. I feel of myself as a pretty big history nerd.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I read the biographies, watch the documentaries, all of it. But every so often, I hit a topic that just makes me realize my entire map of the world is, well,
Incomplete.
incomplete.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little warped.
That's a very common feeling, especially when we step outside the standard Western curriculum.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. We're looking at one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, and specifically one of the oldest Christian churches, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church.
Right.
But here's the thing. Usually when I read about this, it's written by some guy named Smith or Muller sitting in a library in Oxford. Today, we're tossing those guys out.
We are indeed. The material we're diving into today is it's pretty unique because it's a course text designed to provide an emic perspective.
Okay, pause there. Emic. That sounds academic. What does that actually mean?
It's an anthropological term.
Mm.
Think of it as the insider's view. So the etic view is looking from the outside in, like a scientist observing ants. The emic view is asking the ants what they're doing.
Right.
And the source material argues that for centuries, Ethiopian history has been, well, held hostage by Eurocentrism.
You mean the idea that it doesn't count until a European discovers it?
Essentially, the source highlights a conflict in what we call historiography.
The history of history.
Exactly. For a long time, Western scholars like Joe Bludolf were called the founders of Ethiopian studies.
Mm-hmm.
But the irony is, many of these so-called founders, they never even set foot in Ethiopia.
That's wild.
They were analyzing a culture from thousands of miles away, ignoring that Ethiopia had its own written chronicles, its own hagiographies, its own sophisticated literary tradition for centuries.
So while Europe is struggling to keep the lights on, Ethiopia is writing its own history, but we've just been ignoring their textbooks.
We've been treating them as objects of study, not as subjects with their own voice. So today, our mission is to correct that. We're going to explore the origins, the legends, and the theology of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, or EOTC, strictly from the inside out.
I love that. So let's start at the absolute beginning. The name itself, Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
I remember reading somewhere, probably high school, that it's Greek. Something about burnt faces.
That is the standard Western definition, yes. The Greek word is aethiops. Aethio means I burn, and ops means face.
Right.
It was a descriptive and, frankly, kind of a superficial label the Greeks applied to anyone with dark skin south of Egypt. It defines them by what they look like to outsiders.
Which fits that whole external lens problem perfectly. So if we ask the Ethiopians, where do they say the name comes from?
They reject the Greek etymology entirely. The internal tradition, from texts like the Book of Axum, traces the name to a person, not a description.
A person.
A legendary figure named Idiopis.
Oedipus. And who was he?
Tradition holds he was a son of Cush, who was the son of Ham, the son of Noah.
Oh, wow.
The legend says Idiopis actually founded the holy city of Axum. So for the insider, the name Ethiopia isn't about skin color. It's about lineage. It connects the land directly back to the biblical narrative.
That's a massive shift in perspective. It turns a description into a heritage. But before we get to the Bible, what was there before? Was it like Roman paganism, Zeus and Apollo?
It was darker and much more complicated. The source calls it a polytheism phase. You had Sabian migrants from South Arabia who brought gods like the moon god Al-Mukwa.
Yeah.
But there's one indigenous tradition that really dominates.
Yes.
The worship of the serpent.
The serpent, like a snake god.
A literal giant serpent. The legend tells of a king called Arwe. He was half dragon, half python, and he ruled Axum for 40 years.
Okay, when you say ruled, are we talking about a mascot in a temple or?
We're talking about a tyrant. The legend says Arwe demanded tribute from the population to keep from destroying the city.
I have a bad feeling about this.
And the tribute wasn't gold. It was milk and virgin girls.
Oh, yikes. He ate them.
He ate them.
Okay, so you have a dragon king eating the population. How do you get out of that?
You need a hero. Enter a warrior named Ongabo. He wanted to save the girl who was next in line. But he knew he couldn't fight a giant serpent with just a sword.
The scales were too thick.
Exactly. So he used chemistry.
He poisoned him.
He took a sheep mutton and laced it with a potent poison, fed it to Arwe. The serpent died, the reign of terror ended, and Angabo was proclaimed king.
That is straight out of a fantasy novel, but it feels like a metaphor, right? Killing the beast to bring order.
It marks that transition from, primal chaotic nature worship to organized civilization. And Angabo actually becomes the father of the Queen of Sheba.
Oh.
So this dragon-slaying story is the prequel to the most famous event in Ethiopian history.
The Queen of Sheba. Okay, I know this one. She visits King Solomon. They trade riddles. She goes home.
That's the Sunday school version. But the Ethiopian version, from the Kibra Nagas, the Glory of Kings, is so much more detailed.
Go on.
It starts with a merchant named Tamrin. He runs this massive trade caravan to Jerusalem and comes back telling the queen about this King Solomon, the wisest man on earth.
So she goes to fact check him.
She goes to learn. She's searching for truth. She arrives in Jerusalem, is blown away by his wisdom, and she converts to the worship of the God of Israel. But the Kibra Nagas says she didn't just leave with wisdom.
What else?
She left pregnant.
Wait, historically speaking, is that verifiable, or is this a national myth?
And that's the friction point. Western historians treat it as a myth. But for the Ethiopian church and the Solomonic dynasty that ruled Ethiopia until 1974, this is historical fact.
Wow.
The child's name was Menelik I. He grows up in Ethiopia, and when he comes of age, he asks to visit his father.
He goes back to Jerusalem.
He does. And Solomon recognizes him instantly, wants him to stay and rule Israel, but Menelik refuses. He wants to go home. So Solomon sends him back with the firstborn sons of the high priests and nobles of Israel.
So he's importing the aristocracy of Israel into Africa.
It's not just the people he takes. This is the part that changes everything. Tradition says that Menelik, or maybe the priests with him, took the Ark of the Covenant.
The actual Ark, with the 10 Commandments.
The very same. The belief is that the Ark was moved from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, where it resides to this day in the city of Aksum.
Okay, that is a massive claim. But why does it matter? I mean, besides the Indiana Jones factor, what does having the Ark actually do for the church?
It creates a Zionist ideology. The belief is that God's favor, his physical presence, transferred from Israel to Ethiopia. Ethiopia became the new Zion. And because of this connection, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church looks very, very different from Catholic or Protestant churches.
How so? Like, do they still follow the Old Testament laws?
Many of them, yes. The source material calls this the religion by the law phase. To this day, the EOTC practices male circumcision. They observe the Sabbath on Saturday, not just Sunday.
Really, Saturday?
Saturday. And they have dietary laws that mirror Leviticus clean and unclean animals. You won't find pork on the menu.
That is fascinating. Usually in Christianity, you hear that the old law was fulfilled, but they kept it.
They view it as a cumulative inheritance. They didn't replace the Old Testament, they added the New Testament to it. Even their church architecture mirrors the temple in Jerusalem.
With the Holy of Holies.
With a Holy of Holies that only the priests can enter.
So you have this foundation, Dragon Slayer, Solomonic blood, the Ark, Jewish law, but at some point, it becomes Christian. How does that happen?
It actually happens in 3 distinct waves, 3 evangelizations. And the first one is surprisingly early. It's the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in the Bible in Acts chapter 8.
Oh, right, the guy in the chariot.
Exactly. The treasurer to Queen Candace. He'd traveled all the way to Jerusalem to worship, which again proves that connection to Judaism was already there.
Good point.
On his way back, he's reading Isaiah. Philip the Apostle runs up, explains it's about Jesus, and the eunuch accepts it immediately.
And the source made a big deal about him being the first Gentile convert.
Which implies that the seed of Christianity was planted in Ethiopia in the 1st century A.D.,
Yeah.
well before most of Europe. But that was just one man.
It didn't change the state.
For that, we need to fast forward to the 4th century and talk about a shipwreck.
A shipwreck? This sounds like a movie.
It really is. A philosopher, Meropius, is traveling with 2 young boys, Frumentius and Odysseus. They dock at a port on the Red Sea. But the local population has a dispute with Rome.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
It was fatal. The whole crew, Meropius included, is massacred. But the 2 boys are found under a tree, reading. The locals spare them and take them as gifts to the king of Aksum.
Talk about a twist of fate. One minute you're a tourist, the next you're a slave.
But Frumentius was brilliant. He gains the king's trust. He rises from captive to royal treasurer and tutor to the crown prince, Izana.
Wow.
When the king dies, the queen asks Frumentius to help her rule until Izana is old enough.
So this shipwrecked kid is effectively running the empire.
And he uses that power to lay the groundwork. He encourages Roman merchants to build prayer houses. And when Izana takes the throne, Frumentius travels to Alexandria, Egypt. He goes to see Patriarch Athanasius, a huge figure in church history, and says, Ethiopia needs a bishop.
And let me guess, Athanasius picks him.
Yeah, he says, who is better qualified than you? Frumentius returns as Abba Salama, the father of peace. He baptizes King Ezana around 330 AD.
And we know this is real.
We do, because of the coins. Early in Ezana's reign, the coins have the sun and moon, the old gods. Later,
The
they
cross.
bear the cross. It's some of the clearest archaeological evidence of a state converting.
Okay, so you have the individual, then the king. Why does the source mention a third phase? Isn't that it?
Not necessarily. Converting the palace doesn't mean you've converted the village. The third phase, the 9 saints, happened much later, around 488 AD. These were monks fleeing persecution in the Roman Empire.
And they went out into the countryside.
They did. But their biggest contribution wasn't just preaching, it was translation.
Ah, putting the Bible into the local language.
Exactly. Into Geese. They made the faith accessible. They built monasteries on cliff tops like Debre Damo, which you can still only access by climbing a rope. They gave the church its depth.
This brings us to a topic that I honestly found a bit confusing, the Tewahedo doctrine. I kept seeing these words, monophysite and miaphysite. It feels like splitting hairs, but apparently people went to war over this.
They did. This is the core theological identity of the church. Tewahedo means unity,
Unity of what?
of Christ's nature. Here's the conflict. The Western churches, Rome and Constantinople, eventually said Christ had two natures, divine and human, side by side. The Ethiopian church, following Alexandria, said, no, that divides Christ.
They believe in one nature.
One composite nature.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Is there an analogy that helps?
Think of a human being. You have a body and a soul. Two different things, right? But you don't see two things. You see one person. The nature is a union of the two.
Okay, that makes sense.
The Ethiopian position is that Christ's humanity and divinity are united perfectly, without mixing, without separating, without changing. The source says, while the West was obsessed with the reality of the existence, keeping the parts distinct, Ethiopia was focused on the state of the existence, the union.
So why was this so controversial that they got labeled heretics?
Politics. By insisting on their own definition, miaphysite, they were essentially refusing to bow to the authority of the Roman emperor and the pope. It was a declaration of theological independence.
It all comes back to that insider strength. They define themselves.
Precisely.
Okay, I want to pivot to the Golden Age. The source mentions these larger-than-life figures. Let's talk about King Caleb.
Caleb is the warrior saint. He ruled in the 6th century when Aksum was a genuine superpower, controlling trade between Rome, Persia, and India.
And he gets involved in a war across the Red Sea, in Yemen.
Yes, a local ruler there had converted to Judaism and began violently persecuting Christians, burning churches, massacres. Caleb saw this as a personal affront. He launched a massive naval invasion.
So he goes over there, defeats the bad guy, saves the day.
Crushed the resistance, reestablished Christianity. But the most interesting part of Caleb's story isn't the victory. It's what he did afterward.
Let me guess, he built a giant statue of himself.
The opposite. He abdicated.
Yeah.
He sent his royal crown to Jerusalem to be hung at the Holy Sepulchre, and he vanished into a monastery, lived the rest of his life as a simple monk.
Wow, from emperor to a monk in a cell. That's a serious statement about values.
It is. It solidifies that ideal that spiritual power is higher than political power. But if Caleb is the arm of the state, the next figure, Saint Yared, is the soul of the church.
I liked Yared's story because it starts with him failing. The source said he was a slow learner.
He was. He struggled with his studies. His teacher was harsh, and Yared eventually ran away into the woods, ready to quit school forever.
A lot of people can relate to that.
But then he sees something. He's sitting under a tree, and he watches a caterpillar trying to climb up the bark. It crawls up, slips, falls, tries again, slips, falls.
The classic persistence metaphor.
Exactly. After many attempts, the caterpillar finally makes it, and Yared felt ashamed. He thought, this bug has more grit than I do. He went back to his teacher, apologized, and applied himself.
And he didn't just pass, he became a genius, right?
He became the father of Ethiopian sacred music. The legend says God sent 3 birds from paradise. They sang to him and taught him the 3 musical modes, Ge'ez, Ezel, and Are, that are still used today.
Wait, the music used today is from the 6th century.
It's largely unchanged. Yared composed the Degwa, the massive hymn book of the church, and he even invented a system of musical notation, little signs above the text, centuries before Europe developed the staff notation we use now.
That is incredible. So you have a notation system, a literature, a unique theology, and an empire, all functioning at a high level while Europe is trying to figure out how to build a castle.
That is the synthesis the source wants us to have. Ethiopia wasn't a periphery of the world. In its own eyes, it was a center, a Zion. It blended Hamitic, Semitic, and Nilotic peoples into a civilization that didn't need external validation.
It really challenges that mental map we all have, where history just happens in Rome and London and everywhere else is just waiting.
Exactly. And that leads to a final sort of uncomfortable thought the source raises. We mentioned the founders of Ethiopian studies, the Europeans like Ludolf.
Right.
Well, the source points out that Ludolf didn't learn Giez by magic. He had a teacher, an Ethiopian monk named Abba Gorgorios who was living in Europe.
But Ludolf gets the statue and Gorgorios gets a footnote.
Essentially, the intellectual labor of the Ethiopian scholar was mined to build the reputation of the European expert.
That leaves me with a pretty big question.
Okay.
If the history of the EOTC is this rich, and yet it was sidelined for so long, what other histories are we missing? What other insider stories are sitting in archives right now, ignored because they aren't written in English or French?
That is the question. And I suspect the answer is a lot more than we think.
Well, that is something for you to chew on today. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. We'll see you next time. I have to confess something. I feel of myself as a pretty big history nerd. You know, I read the biographies, watch the documentaries, all of it. But every so often, I hit a topic that just makes me realize my entire map of the world is, well, incomplete.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little warped.
That's a very common feeling, especially when we step outside the standard Western curriculum.
And that is exactly what we are doing today. We're looking at one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, and specifically one of the oldest Christian churches, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church.
Right.
But here's the thing. Usually when I read about this, it's written by some guy named Smith or Muller sitting in a library in Oxford. Today, we're tossing those guys out.
We are indeed. The material we're diving into today is it's pretty unique because it's a course text designed to provide an emic perspective.
Okay, pause there. Emic. That sounds academic. What does that actually mean?
It's an anthropological term. Think of it as the insider's view. So the etic view is looking from the outside in, like a scientist observing ants.